Hey, welcome back, everybody. Welcome to this Sunday. Hopefully you're doing well. I mean, we started out the show. I've talked a lot about a lot of the headline news that's happening. So much, so fast, and we try to process it and try to keep our head straight as it relates to elections and things that are happening along the way. Lately, as we know, the tragedy that we have read about, seen, we've heard, maybe we personally encountered with friends or family and such, but this horrible shooting that happened in Florida. But then what also happened in Ohio? What happened in a Paradise Valley school district here just this week with the student and such. And people aren't really aware of all the different things that are happening. But joining us right now is Seth Leibsohn, great friend, talk show radio. I mean, talk show, your congressional district candidate. We'll talk about Congressional District 9 here a little bit. But then, Seth, you have an incredible amount of experience, you know, from Not My Kid to other think tank economics. I mean, you were under the tutelage of guys like Kemp, and I just look at everything that you've done in your life, and it's remarkable. And when I see you speak, I'm always inspired. And I mentioned that to you in a text message, but I just love capacity, and you have so much of it. I appreciate you joining us today.
Well, thanks, Robert. I love the work you've done. You've been monumentally important, not only for the Republican Party here in Arizona, the conservative movement here, but nationally. You got great music. And if I have capacity, you have cowbell. So it's good to be with you, brother. Right. Thanks for having me.
You got it. We'll make it happen together. Hey, so this week I had the great privilege of watching. So my daughter Faith, you've heard me talk about her, where she is a conservative activist, and she's a young lady. She's 14 years old, freshman at Pinnacle High School. She started a teenage Republican organization there, and anywhere from 30 to 50 young people every week going to have a meeting with her. I think it's one of the most active TARS groups in the country at this particular point. But she had a special guest this week, and it was Seth Leibsohn. So Seth came out and he gave his talk. But one of the things as we were walking across campus, and Seth and I had some quiet time before the young people came in, we started talking about the shooting and the security. So we're going to get to this with gun control and all the other discussions that are happening out there. But Seth, do you want to tell everybody about your experience at Pinnacle High School?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you again to you and your daughter, Faith. She's great. She is going to be the first female president of the United States.
Yeah, I agree. It terrifies me.
She is fantastic, and those kids were fantastic. But yeah, it was interesting being at that high school, of course, in the last couple of weeks with all the stories in the air about Parkland, what to do, how to prevent it, how to solve it. It just seemed very common sense to me. I've been to any number of schools. I've been in education for a long time. I worked for the former U.S. Secretary of Education, Bill Bennett, as his chief of staff. And, of course, through Not My Kid, which I chaired for many years. So I've been on a lot of schools. But your daughter's school just seemed to be very common sense. It wasn't rocket science. You go in, there's a holding room for any visitor. With locked, and it seemed like bulletproof glass doors, and it wasn't obtrusive, it wasn't intrusive, it wasn't scary. It just seemed very common sense and commonplace, and very easy as far as entering and exiting for the students. They had a security guard and one lane open for cars to come and go. I made a wrong turn to visit the school and went into the student lot, and they were very pleasant. The security guard was right there, turned me right around. No one could get in and out or through them, and they directed me to the main entrance, where I went through that very simple, common sense, commonplace entryway. So, I mean, I think, Robert, a lot of us are overthinking this,
Yep.
And schools like your daughter's are good examples of the actual proving the theoretical. You can keep schools safe without turning them into prisons.
That's right. And we walked into the C building, and as we walked in the hallway, you look up, and there was a hall monitor, adult hall monitor, with a radio in her hand, and she saw us coming and immediately went over to us and said, "Hey, what can I help you with?" And, you know, we had our visitor passes on, so we looked more official, and then she escorted us to her room, but you could see the anxiousness to do her job. But that was the other thing that struck me, too, is every one of these buildings has somebody like that at the entrances to make sure that there's everybody that there should be there. Ultimately is what it came down to. So
that's right. And if you're not supposed to be there, there's no way that you can get in.
That's right.
And it wasn't obtrusive, as I say. And, you know, I'm not a fan of making schools look like prisons. You don't need to. And this school showed that.
That's right. You look at, and so one of the things I've noticed with the high schools and some of the elementary and such is they're putting these fences up around the schools, which is fine. They're decent. They're not too scary looking. When I grew up, or still my high school, if you go back to my high school in East Lansing, Michigan, there are no fences. Anybody could get in almost anywhere. There's windows all the way around the school and such. And schools like that would be a little bit more off-putting, I think, than where we are now. I think a lot of the districts have actually engaged in a meaningful way here. Hey, we're just about out of time for this segment. We're going to be right back, and Seth's agreed to stay with us. But Seth, I want to talk a little bit about, I don't know if you're familiar with what happened in Paradise Valley School District or at the Paradise Valley High School this week, but another kind of echoing of a good outcome that was stopped by people that were engaged and had the courage to step up. So we'll be right back in a few minutes here, and we'll be back with Seth Leibsohn. Welcome back, everybody. This is Robert Graham. You're listening to 960 The Patriot Sunday morning. Hopefully this is your refresh day. Hit the button, feel better, stretch out. And if you're awake listening to the show, thank you so much. If you're working today, we're welcome back. We have a special guest who's carried over from the last segment, Seth Leibsohn. Seth Leibsohn has multiple levels of experience, not just in public policy, but within business, within law, with economic development, speechwriting, some things that you shared the other day, Seth, I wasn't aware of as it relates to your background and such. And here we are now with you running for Congressional District 8. But before we get to your campaign, we were talking about Parkland and what happened there, and then a Paradise Valley school in its district called Pinnacle High School, and this experience that both of us had this last time we went in. And I've had that every time, but I wasn't as aware because it wasn't on the front of my mind as it relates to the way Pinnacle really operates and protects our students and just keeps a safe campus overall. But I subscribe. I have an app on my phone called Next Door Neighbor. I'm in the Desert Ridge community, which is up in North Phoenix, and they send us articles here and there. And this one struck my mind, and it said on February 28th at approximately 8:30 a.m., Phoenix police investigated a threat received at a local high school in the area of 3900 East Bell Road. That would be Paradise Valley High School. Several students reported to the school administrators that another student was posting threats via a social media platform. The 17-year-old suspect posted an online threat indicating he would commit acts of violence and self-harm on school campus. Officers located the suspect on campus, detained him without incident. No weapons were located as part of the investigation, but they went on. They interviewed him and they went deep, and they actually charged him. The suspect was detained at the Juvenile Court Center for one count of interference with or disruption of educational institution. That count they didn't say, but that's a felony, and it's a Class 6 felony, and one count of threats. And then a Class 1 misdemeanor. So they went through this. So you had these people. It goes through this article is interesting because it also touches on and says, hey, look at the courage of these young people that come forth. And then it talks about the integrated response from the students, the administrators, and law enforcement, and then voila, they apprehend this young man before anything happens. And those are the stories that we really want to keep hearing. If this is going to be a pattern here, we want to stop it. And so, you talk about common sense approach. This seems like, again, we have systems in place, but now here's a story where they saw something and they said something. So what do you think? I don't know if you're familiar with what happened in Ohio with the young man shooting himself as well. But, weighing in on all this gun control discussions, when you think about age change or having, you have the gun-free zones versus somebody that's trained and ready. Where are the risks? This is getting to be a little bit of a slippery slope because it's being propagated on both sides now, not just one.
No, this was a good story done right. You used the word, I don't know if it's going to be a pattern or not. If you want to stop a pattern, this is how you do it, with zero tolerance. So good on the kids for reporting it, seeing something and saying something. And just as importantly, maybe more importantly, good on law enforcement for taking it seriously. You got to do a shout-out to our county attorney, Bill Montgomery, who deals with a lot of these juvenile cases. They go through his office, and he takes these kinds of threats very seriously. You shut it down. You don't give it oxygen. and hopefully you stop a pattern. The only way you feed a fire is with oxygen. You deprive it with oxygen by actions like this. One of the things that I think is behind this story, Robert, and I hear in your voice, is the concern that there is now no community that is immune from these kinds of concerns anymore, whether they are elementary or high schools with drug problems or violence issues. These things do not discriminate among area code or zip code, and so everyone's alerts and vigilance needs to be high for a little while, because I do think with this kind of vigilance and this kind of example, it will go away. It will be shut down.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I look at, we talk about schools and then churches. There was a pastor that was interviewed in one of our southern states, and he said to the interviewer, he said, look, I can tell you who in our choir is packing a concealed weapon, which one of our ushers, when they're collecting tithing, is carrying a concealed weapon, and then there was one more people within his congregation that he could say, we've trained them, they've all been through tactical training, they all have weapons, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh. And I had somebody at church the other day say to me that this is it was a female, first time that I've ever wanted to possibly put a firearm in my purse on the way to church. No. Because people are horribly concerned. But again, it's like, I agree with you. When you start to extinguish or eliminate the oxygen, whatever the fuel is, and I think a lot of times this copycat stuff, this young man in Ohio that actually ended up killing himself, he was infatuated with Columbine. And when they did the investigation, they found all this. But now when I think the barriers start to show up, I think it's making people think twice about doing it. Hey, in shifting gears to another thing that I wanted to touch today was on this whole opioid disposition. You have been a champion to fight against drugs as a whole. I mean, substance abuse is something that's running rampant. It's unbelievable to hear about the different types of drugs that are finding their ways into schools and such. And you've been out there fighting hard on this, and the president has really taken up this battle. And our governor has been one of the first people that I think really had the loudest voices in a big position of being elected. And so what are you seeing happening now with the effort? I mean, you've really championed it, but how is Arizona looking at large as it relates to what's going on?
Thanks, Robert, and kudos to you for joining us in the fight as you have and as you've organized your institutions you're affiliated with to help out, too. This takes everyone. It takes churches, it takes schools, it takes educators, it takes community leaders, it takes radio hosts, it takes everyone. You've got to throw the kitchen sink at it, because when we did in the 1980s, when we threw the kitchen sink at this problem, we reduced the problem by 50%. That's a great story that people have forgotten. You can solve this problem. Arizona is going to, I think, be a leader on this. It takes a little while to get statistics, but I think we are going to show the difference between states that have lax rules about substance abuse and states that do not, and you're going to see Arizona looking better. For example, Colorado was the leader in legalizing marijuana for recreational use. Their numbers and their teen use rates are sky high. Arizona, with your help and others, turned that ballot initiative the other way and said, no, we're not doing that here. We're not going to experiment with adding one more dangerous substance to the legal menu of substances people can use. So I think we're going to have a really good test, and we're going to see that Arizona use rates are going to be a lot lower than states that legalize. You know, the Colorado story is pretty sad. There was a story this week of a Texas college that no longer recruits football players from Colorado. The entire state is they are no longer recruiting from Colorado. You know why? They can't pass drug tests. They can't pass drug tests. This is a tragedy for our youth. It's a tragedy for our society, but we can fix it. We can address it. We've done it before. We're doing it now.
You know, it's interesting that you bring up Colorado because, I mean, the statistics, if people read about it and the edibles and all the challenges, the minors that have accidentally ingested, I mean, it is crazy to see how many people. But one thing that was pretty telling for me was I was at the Denver airport not too long ago, and as I walked through the airport, I think I saw 5 or 6 drug dogs, around, just walking around, even before security, just sniffing on everybody. Because what's happening is a lot of drug dealers are going into that state. And either drug dealers or just users, and they're packing up. It's legal to buy it, and then they take it out of state. They either drive it across the border, or they or they do this. But I think, my gosh, the overhead infrastructure expense, not to mention the lives that are being impacted by it, but just think about the cost of administration that this government now has to engage with because of this new substance that is absolutely being abused on this legal market that's now taking place in Colorado. It's amazing to me.
It changes the state. Look at what it's done to the main mall, outside mall in Denver. It's not the same place. Look at what it's done to Salvation Army. You know, the Salvation Army is struggling to keep beds because of the population the marijuana users have brought in there. And I think the most important message, Robert, for parents right now to understand, who get a lot of mixed messages about this, is it's not the marijuana of when you and I were younger. It's just not the same drug. This is a drug that is 10 times stronger than what was going on in the 80s. It is an entirely different drug. I almost hate to even call it marijuana. I call it turbo pot. And you look at the medical studies and scientific studies coming online about what it's doing to the teen brain. It changes the teenage brain. This is not anything we want to mess around with.
No, I watch it, I see it, and I agree. You know, I always would say this to my family, and maybe this is a theory that doesn't really have any relevance, but when you open up something into a free market and it becomes, people start to compete, and what do they compete? And their services, it's, you know, they either have better services or better product. Well, how do you make a better product when you're talking about a drug? It's something that may smell different or get you higher, right?
Potency. And stronger potency.
That's it. So they compete in potency, and then this is what happens. We get to a point where it changes. Again, people, pot's not that bad. We're like, what are you talking about? You know, we see this where some children have the addictive response like they did with meth and such with marijuana because it's so potent, and
we just don't need it. Yeah, and you mentioned the opioid crisis, Robert. We do have a crisis.
We do.
I want people to understand how big a deal this is. For those that have gone to the Vietnam Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C., there's 58,000 names on that wall. It took 18 years to put those 58,000 names. We're losing 64,000 people a year now. We could build more than a Vietnam Memorial Wall every single year with what we're losing in substance abuse. That's deaths. I'm not even getting into how it affects workplace, families, ongoing addiction and treatment, and law enforcement and education outcomes. It's a serious crisis.
So, I mean, I look at this, and I just have to say this before, as we're wrapping up here, too. Seth, you have one thing I appreciate is, like you said, hey, just ask me any questions. You're confident, you have a command of the issues, and what's happening, you know, with trade and all the other elements from, you know, our national security, what's happening here at home, how we need to consider our relationships with other countries and such, and this whole congressional stint. Now, here you are, CD9, Congressional District 9, running for Congress. Your website is Seth, the number 4, Congress.com. And Seth, tell us a little bit about the campaign. I mean, you're doing it. I'm watching you out there. You're in this district. And how are people responding to you?
Thanks an awful lot, Robert. I'm having a great time doing it. I wouldn't have entered the race unless we thought we could win it. That was my first criteria. We know we can win this. We can turn this Democratic seat and flip it to a Republican seat. I'm getting a great response. You know, my whole life has been in politics and communications, and working for some of the greatest people anyone could be privileged to work for. You mentioned Jack Kemp, Bill Bennett, Jeane Kirkpatrick. These were Reagan's greatest foot soldiers. I was their number 2 for many years, and now I am running to be number 1 representing Congressional District 9 here. We're going to do it. There's a lot of issues to deal with, but one of the things I like to think is that in a district like 9, which has a lot of independents, that with a serious message, with sincere convictions and a willingness to talk to anybody like you have, we can flip this. We can get disaffected Democrats. We can attract independents. And we can get common sense conservatism back in Congressional District 9.
And and I appreciate you doing this. I mean, it's hard running for campaigns or running for office. Campaigns are manic; they're up and down emotionally. Seth is just staying steady on the message, and as you can hear, he has a remarkable background, and that kind of perspective lends itself to great leadership. And so, again, when you go to Seth, the number 4 Congress, SethForCongress.com, there's an opportunity there to sign up as a volunteer, but we need people. The other thing I want you to show, you people that are listening to this call, listening to our conversation today, we need you to engage in the process. Democrats are all beating the drum saying, we are going to overturn, we're going to win back the House majority, we're going to win back the Senate majority, and we're going to stick it to Trump. We need you to help guys like Seth, candidates like Seth, to finish over the goal line ahead of the opposition, and that's how we maintain our conservative principles and and what I consider the best governing principles, and that's the Republican platform and people that are like Seth. Again, you're listening to Robert Graham on 960 The Patriot. Seth, thank you for joining us. I mean, I want to keep doing this because I want to help, but I want to also help all these different things that you're working on, because you are a great example to me and a great example to our family. So thanks for joining us today.
Godspeed and God bless you and all the Grahams, Robert.
And you too, Seth. That's Seth Leibsohn. And if you haven't been tuning in during the week, Monday through Friday from 3 to 6, Seth is live. You can call in with questions. You can hit him up on a number of different issues. The idea is, again, bring you information that's going to help you take positive action for great outcomes for our country, our state, our local, our government, our kids, you name it. The opportunities need to be there, and you can help. We'll be right back.